Magandang araw po sa inyong lahat. May 23, 2022, Monday. Welcome po sa The Stock Market Today. Kung first time niyo po sa channel ko, ito po si Benji Chidoro. Ako po ay isang retired bank officer na nagsimula mag-invest sa Philippine stock market noong 2007. At ginagawa ko po ito araw-araw. Nire-report ko ang pinaka-paboritong at pinaka-aktibong balita tungkol sa inyong stocks. Kung gusto niyo po na content, I invite you to subscribe to my channel. Kung meron po kayong stocks na gusto ipa-review, paki-comment lang po sa comment box at aking prioritize. Hindi po ako financial advisor. Anything I say in this channel ay hindi po financial advice. Ang ating news ay isang special report mula sa Time Magazine. Kasama ang ating financial headlines at ang resulta ng trading sa ating PSE ngayong araw, May 23, 2022, dito lamang sa The Stock Market Today. Sige po, puntahan po natin ang ating financial headlines from the business world. Max Group says price hikes last option in mitigating headwinds. PSE aims for better stock liquidity after Investor Day. So they're hosting an Investor Day, on May 24, and they'll be inviting the CEOs of various companies in order to talk about the stock market in general. At maganda itong naisip ng PSE. And then, we also have our top stories here. BIR falls short of first quarter collection. Freight fees expected to climb further. And NPL ratio eases to a 3-month low. Pero ang ating main news ay hindi po dyan. But before I go to the Time Magazine article, meron pong interesting article po dito from the Nikkei, Nikkei Asia. Marcos Philippine election win is a lesson in democratic failures. Pero first paragraph lang po ito, because wala po akong subscription. I would need a subscription to get the full story, So, I'll just read the first paragraph. Tokyo. Ferdinand Marcos Jr. marked his landslide Philippine election win last week by praising his father and namesake for teaching him the value and meaning of true leadership. It was a striking comment on a man who ran a dictatorship accused of thousands of killings and stealing up to 10 billion. Okay. So, hanggang doon lang po yung article dahil wala po tayong subscription. But let's now go to the Time Magazine issue. The world should be worried about a dictator's son apparent win in the Philippines. And this was written by Jonathan Corpus Ong, dated May 10. Ngayon ko lang po nakita ito, and I'd like to share this with you. Si Jonathan Ong is an associate professor of global digital media at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and fellow at Harvard University's Sorenstein Center. He is a 2022 Andrew Carnegie Fellow. So may credentials po ito, Di tulad po sa karamihan na nakikita po natin sa TikTok at YouTube na kung ano-ano sinasabi, na wala namang, hindi na natin alam kung ano po yung sinasabi nila o yung kanilang source. Pero ito po, meron pong credentials po ito. And which reminds me of an article of Time during martial law. Ito po yung Time issue nung September 24, 1979. Ang title po niyan, I just saw it now, The Philippines, Powder Keg of the Pacific, September 24, 1979. This coincided with the 7th year anniversary of martial law. And when this issue came up in Time, in 1979, let me show you that issue, Yan po. Yan po yung Time Magazine ng 1979 with a picture of Marcos. when I saw that issue in 1979, hot topic po siya. Kasi po wala po kayo makikitang ganyang article in the Philippines at that time. Not even in the newspapers would you see that kind of things that is being said here. And alam niyo, during the time of martial law, in 1979, tatlo lang po yung broadsheets na existing, Yan po yung the Daily Express, the Times Journal, and the Manila Bulletin. Yung pre-martial law na Manila Times wasn't operating. Sinara po yan ni Marcos. The Manila Chronicle run by the Lopez, sarado din po yan. Wala po kasi, at the time, wala po kasi freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and freedom of assembly. Mag-rally ka dyan, stockade ka kagad. So everybody was afraid. And ang nababasa niyo po sa dyaryo, let me put up again kung ano yung laman sa loob ng time. Ito po yung laman. Yan. Ang mababasa niyo sa dyaryo, puro magaganda about the administration. Why? Because Marcos controlled the press. And the reason kung bakit hinayaan niya itong article na lumabas, by the way, my father was a subscriber of Time. And when he brought home that copy of Time magazine, nabasa ko kagad dyan in 10 minutes. Anyway, kaya hinayaan ni Marcos na ma-publish yan was because offhand, he wanted to show to the world that there is freedom of the press in the Philippines na sa totoo lang ay wala. So he wanted to have a good image of how he projects the Philippines to the world. And hindi naman, most of the things written here ay hindi magaganda, pero meron din siyang sinabing maganda. And I think yun yung reason kung bakit hinayaan niya. Plus the fact that he wanted to have a good image of the Philippines. Kasi kung isosuppress niya uli yan, ay bad image na naman tayo sa world, di ba? So ito pa po yung isang nasa loob, yung 3rd and 4th page. So makikita niyo po dyan si Imelda at si Ferdinand, Cardinal Sin, the NPAs, and then the military, and then in the next page you will see the cultural center of the Philippines in contrast with the slums and yung killing sa Negros and all that, tapos nandito yung opposition leader Benigno Aquino. He was still alive then. Yan po. Anyway, yung article pong yan, I have placed it in the description below so you can read about it. And in 1979, I was just 3rd year college, and this was the first time I have read a piece on martial law in the eyes of a foreign correspondent. And siguro it will give you also a glimpse of how it was during martial law in the eyes of an independent writer, looking into the Philippines. So maganda pong tignan itong article na ito, and perhaps you may learn something about it, Di tulad nung lumalabas ngayon sa YouTube na kung ano-ano na hindi mo alam na glorious years of the Philippines, yung years of martial law. I suggest that you read about this and take a glimpse of what it was from 1972 to 1986. Pero ito midpoint na ito ng martial law. So it's very interesting to read about it. Okay? So let's now go to our main topic. Yan. Okay. So naka-paste lang po sa description below itong article na ito. So tignan nyo na lang po mamaya. Pero ang main topic po natin ay ito. The world should be worried about a dictator's son apparent win in the Philippines. After a maddening campaign season which saw a polarized electorate disagree on everything from the methodology of opinion polls to the moral significance of showing up for public debates, voters in the Philippines have elected a new set of leaders. In unofficial election results announced on Tuesday, Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr., the son and namesake of the late Philippine dictator Ferdinand Marcos, is leading Leni Robredo, his main rival and leader of the brave yet beleaguered political opposition by a wide margin. A Marcos Jr. win would complete his once disgraced family resurrection arc. Exiled to Hawaii 3 decades ago in the aftermath of a peaceful revolution that overthrew his father's brutal regime, Marcos and his family are set to return to Malacañang Palace, the presidential residence, which reaches intact, new and powerful allies, and frighteningly bold electoral mandate. Filipino columnist Benjamin Pimentel could only describe this bewildering plot twist in the language of high fantasy. It's as if Kylo Ren emerged and his empire is back in power. For a while, the Marcoses were cancelled public pariahs. Merely extending a social invitation to a Marcos was a stuff of scandal, but thanks in part to a patient long-term project of brand rehabilitation on social media and expedient power brokering with powerful Dutertes to unify forces against liberal elite rivals, the family has made a successful comeback. Their restoration presents a democratic, indeed existential crisis for the Philippines. In recent years, many analysts have unfairly caricatured the so-called surprise electoral victories of populist leaders as a result of uneducated voters brainwashed by disinformation. But this is reductive. For me, the Marcos victory should instead trigger a hard and honest reckoning of how and why most Philippine voters are willing to delve deeper into authoritarian fantasy and reject the high principles and hero personalities of liberal democracy. It is also reflective of the shared problems of many advanced democracies, and not just those in the global south. The Philippines may be one of Asia's oldest and largest democracies, but its continued embrace of strongman leaders is a wake-up call that liberal democracy messages of equality and rule of law will eventually run hollow once voters get tired of the same old heroes and political dynasties. The Marcos myths of a strong and stable nation and being misunderstood victims who could thus relate with anyone's social and economic victimhood would resonate in many countries. They are artfully compelling stories for the young and the excluded. For too long, progressives have taken for granted the facts in themselves are sufficient. In the case of the Philippines, the liberal weapons of historical accuracy and fact-checking are simply no match for Marcos' creative folklore, turbocharged by social media fan culture and relatable influencers. Marcos supporters, it was inspiring, monumental, and important. It was also too little too late, coming too many decades of blaming or patronizing the bobotante or the dumb voter and the masa or the masses. At the same time, I hope such dialogues will turn from a campaign exigency to a sincere long-term willingness to listen and understand the issues faced by excluded communities while respecting their own agency and cunning in political participation. Such a project might help reframe the thorny issue of disinformation and trolling in the Philippines and elsewhere. Rather than scapegoating social media as a technological brainwasher, turning out voters to support populist strongmen, we must consider why communities resonate with and willingly participate in myth-making, misinformation, and historical revisionism online. When we actually talk to paid political trolls, we might be surprised as to why this has become a jig for many. We might also consider why progressives have failed to hurt and traumatize communities any satisfying narratives to address their concerns, leaving far-right media manipulators to have full control of information voids. With his family's comeback decades in the making, Marcos presumably has a heavy axe to grind. Canned slogans of unity and positivity during his campaign might mean that he will eschew any high-profile quarrels with rival political families. However, the incoming president and his family are very explicit about being victims of an important player in liberal democracy, the press. In some interviews, Marcos had let slip that he sees himself as the victim of mainstream media, insinuating that journalists have their own agenda. Borrowing a line from Donald Trump's playbook against liberal media outlets, he has recast as fake news legitimate evidence of his family's ill-gotten wealth. Marcos and his sister, Senator Amy Marcos, have also accused social media giant Facebook of bias in its choice of fact-checking organizations. Rather than introduce top-down censorship of the press, as his father did during martial law, Marcos Jr.'s strategy will likely involve stigmatizing unsympathetic news outlets. He may support a stratified media ecosystem, split between friendly organizations granted access to the halls of power and critical ones banished from Malacanang antechambers. Philanthropic foreign attempts to bolster the local liberal press or support democratic organizations and opposition groups will likely be attacked as unpatriotic by Marcos in the emotive language of nationalism, as Duterte did before him, and as Modi does in India. Tech platforms must now tread very carefully under a leader determined to rewrite his family's and nation's history. If they are too hostile, then they might find themselves villainized and restricted as in other illiberal democracies. Platforms instead need to work collaboratively with academics and legal experts for strategic policy advocacy. Content takedowns and deplatforming alone will not solve this information crisis in the Philippines or elsewhere. Authoritarian incumbents and exiles around the world are watching the Marcos comeback story with avid interest and have already given a powerful takeaway. As authors of the first draft of history, the press are Marcos' first target and an easy one, but his ultimate target is history itself. By recasting himself as the victim of elite historians and academics, as the victim even of the activists who survived torture and abuse during his father's dictatorship, Marcos shows that false victimhood claims can effectively appeal to an anxious public when packaged in compelling myth and melodrama. To fight back, progressive leaders should advance their own counter-narrative and persuasive vision. But first, they must acknowledge their failure to listen. Yan ang article ni Time Magazine, and it's a very interesting and very informative article, and it's an eye-opener actually, an eye-opener to every one of us. Okay, so let's now go to the before we go to the Philippine Stock Exchange, acknowledge muna natin po yung mga comments ninyo, no? Okay, Ray Gardes, Sir, AEV, anong prediction nyo for this month? Okay, sama po natin si AEDV. Rudy Mateo, Sir, may hawak po akong SMC. Please include it in your next video. Maraming salamat. We have Iset Proman. Nice explanation on interest rate hike. Salamat sa mga requests this week. Baka next week sa interest rates kung maka-enumerate kayo ng possible stocks na shock-proof. Shock-proof sa interest rate. Wala po akong nalalaman ganyan. Basta't negosyo po, apektado po ng interest rate. At yung mga kumpanya po sa stock market, negosyo po yan. Kaya po siya nasa stocks. Po, kahit po yung brokerage, yung CTS Global, apektado po yan ng interest rates. Kasi po, yung mga kliyente niya ay mga negosyante din, di po ba? So, kung tumaas yung interest rate, in general, the stock market would go down. Why? Because loans will become more expensive, more expense, and then these companies might forgo capex, di ba? Might forgo expansion, magkakaroon ng slowdown in the economy. And in general po, ay slow down po ang economy. Kasi kinokontrol mo yung inflation eh. Kinukuha mo yung pera from, you're siphoning of money from the system eh. And it's a balancing act. You raise interest rates too high, ang danger po niyan ay recession. Ngayon, kailangan tama lang po yung application ng rising interest rates. Kundi ay baka tuluyang huminto yung machine natin, ano? Yung economic machine natin na hindi na mag-move forward dahil kinuhanan mo na, inubusan mo na ng lakas ng gasolina eh. Kailangan may natitira pa siyang gasolina para umandar, di ba? O yun lamang po. So wala pa ako nalalaman ganon na stocks na interest rate proof. Is it Roman? Okay. So sana po nasagutan ko po ang inyong tanong. Philip Gons, nice, it looks bullish na sir. Actually, the trend is still bearish, but if you'll take a look mamaya dun sa Philippine Stock Exchange natin on how it performed, it fell actually. So right now, it's bearish to sideways ang kanyang movement. Okay? So, let's now go to the Philippine Stock Exchange Index and let's see what happened to the index today, no? So, the PSEI, sorry po, napahaba po, no? Because I was discussing the articles, yung articles po natin on Time Magazine at sinama ko po yung article ng 1979, yung glimpse po ng martial law in the Philippines. And this was written by a foreign correspondent. Hindi po local ang sumulat nito. Time Magazine is a reputable magazine with its balanced reporting. So, tingnan natin. The PSEI lost 58.48 points or 0.87% down to close at 6687.85. So, it's a red candlestick today and yung ating indicators are above, no? Meaning bearish po siya. And RSI is below the midpoint. It's 45.45. Bearish po ang dating niya. And on the very, very short term appears to be moving sideways. Kasi po, I think the 25 basis points increase is just the first of another interest rate hike this June. So, hindi binigla ng BSP yung interest rate hike. Like I've explained earlier, baka huminto yung economy natin kung binigla yung pagtaas ng interest rate. So, doon naman sa market activity, 113 companies declined, 72 advanced, while 58 remained unchanged. The all-share index is also in the red, 0.61% down, while the sectoral indices are down except for mining, which gained 0.62%. The losers was led by the financials at 1.81%. Ngayon, based on your request, we will be reviewing your stocks, no? So we'll be reviewing SMC, AEB, plus the top most active stocks, no? Top 4, Converge, SMPH, Ali, and BDO. So let's now go to AEV. Si AEV, bearish po si AEV. So from this point here, when it leveled off, so nagko-consolidate po siya dito nung 2021 July, just mga 10 months before, AEB began to move up and it became bullish, no? But the turning point came here when the stock began to fall down and our short-term indicator came piercing through. This was on February 2022 at dito po nagkaroon po ng crossover yung stock dito, nag-cross po yung medium-term indicator, the short-term indicator with the medium-term indicator on March 23. Ito po yung spring equinox, pero wala po kinalaman ng seasons dyan. Nasabi ko lang po, actually near the spring equinox kasi March 21 po yan, the start of spring. Anyway, but yung ating long-term indicator is still above, ano? So, at that time, it was still, the long-term outlook was still bullish, but then came April 7, nung palapit na po tayo sa election and nagkakaroon na po ng indication kung sino po ang mananalo, plus the fact that there was this protracted war between Russia and Ukraine and the US with soaring interest rates, no? Soaring inflation because of that war, tayo na nahawa na rin tayo dun, ay naging bearish na po starting April 20 to April 26 nung tumaas, nung nag-crossover na po yung long term to the short and medium term indicator, bearish na po yung ating market, no? And this reflected on AEV, and it's now bearish, although maganda to pick up the stock because on the short term it has somewhat stabilized, no? So this is the support area. Tingnan natin yung SNR based on yan. Okay, this is already the support area at 46.75, and the nearest resistance based on the Investagram's chart is very thin, 48.40, for 48.20 rather, and the higher one is 56.90. Pero kung ima-manually plot po natin, ito po, yan, 46.75. The nearest resistance, I would say, pinakamalapit po and pinaka-reasonable would be here. 52.42. 52.42 rather. So, if you are a trader, I would suggest you stay away from the stock muna. Although this may be a good time to buy if you are a long-term, if you have a long-term outlook, kasi nag-oversold na po siya dito noong May 13 and it's starting to move up already. So the stock may be is already at a bargain. But kung trader po kayo, ay wait and see po muna tayo. Okay? Ngayon po, then we take a look at Converge. So sa Converge naman ay, naku, bearish po. It's moving sideways and it had a red engulfing candlestick today, which is already support level. Yan po. So nasa 26.62 and nasa 26.30 po ang support, ano? So actually, it's a support and resistance kasi is an area, it's not an exact point. The resistance is here at 30.47 and it's bearish to sideways ang kanyang movement with RSI bearish at 39. Then Converge, SMC pala. Na-tackle ko ba yung SMC? Okay, SMC, I think I skip SMC, but ito na po, no? Bearish to sideways po ang kanyang movement. In general, it's moving downwards, but on the short term, it is moving sideways. RSI is at 47.84. Support is here at 100, no? But bearish po siya at wait and see lang po muna tayo for SMC. But it had good fundamentals, eh. Nandito po yung fundamentals niya. It had net income, but it's lower than last year's first quarter, by 18.81%. But yung yearly niya is up, no? 120% larger than last year's earnings. So may fundamentals naman po si SMC. Kaso lang marami po siyang loans. And with interest rates rising, tataas po yung kanyang loan servicing expense po niya tataas. Kasi magbabayad po siya ng higher interest, eh. Dahil tumaas po yung interest rates ng 25 basis points. Okay? Then, SMPH. SMPH, uy, mukhang nag-recover, ha? Alam niyo, sideways to bullish na po siya, no? And there was this large engulfing candlestick on May 13 with volume, tapos sumipa na po siya the following day with volume pa rin. And that was the time that our indicators is seen piercing through, meaning mukhang naka-recover si SMPH. And I was in the mall yesterday, sa SM, no? I was in SM yesterday. Alam mo, parang walang pandemya, although lahat naka-mask. The people are back in the malls, in reality. And mukhang business is back, no? So, ang pinaka-support Pinakamalapit na support nandito po sa 36.13. And the resistance, the higher one would be at 39.64. Yan po si SMPH. Just looks like it's bullish again as RSI is already at 58. 50 po yung midpoint po natin. Meaning above 50 ay masasabi po natin mataas o tumataas po ang stock. Okay? Then we have Ali. Properties. Okay, Ali is still bearish, but I guess this is a good bargain already kasi ito po yung support niya. Yung 28.50 is the lowest since September 2020. Yan po yung presyo niya noong September 2020. Yan, September 3. No, it's August 2020, ha? Correct, it's September 2020. Okay, so pinaka-support po niya yan, and the resistance, the nearest would be at this level here, 38.21. So it's bearish po, no? But Ali is a resilient stock, and it's a very good stock, no, to invest in. And I guess that if you are an investor, a long-term investor, it's a good time to buy. Okay, then finally we have BDO. BDO is part of the SM group, just moving sideways, although it lost 2 pesos and 10 centavos today, or 1.63%. Doon lang po siya naglalaro, no? Nasa support po siya. Ang support po niya nasa 125, and the resistance is 134. But it reached its highest at 140 here, no? 140.40 yung 52-week high niya. But right now, doon po sa area niya naglalaro. Support of 125 and resistance of 134. Support and resistance, these are not exact points, but these are areas. Yan po ang ating report sa stock market, ika-23 ng Mayo. Ito po si Benji Chodoro. Nagpapaalala, an investment in knowledge pays the best interest. Love your country. Give our new leaders a chance, but continue to do what is good, right, and just. Maraming salamat sa inyong pagtangkilik. Hanggang sa muli. Stay safe, God bless, and bye for now.